What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with huge update to UFC lawsuit. The UFC suffered a major setback in court this week when a pair of judges with the Ninth Circuit Court denied the promotion's appeal of the certification of a class action lawsuit against them. The suit, which is led by Kung Lee and a number of other UFC vets, alleges that the UFC used anti-competitive practices to establish market dominance and underpay fighters. After it was certified as a class over the summer, the floodgates were opened on the UFC. With the class certification, a reported 1,200 fighters who competed for the UFC from 2010 to 2017 can all join in on getting their share of what is estimated to be nearly $1 billion payout. The UFC's attorneys attempted to appeal the class certification, with judges this week ruling against the promotion. As a result, the suit is likely going to trial next spring. This, of course, is separate from the other suit against the UFC led by Kajan Johnson, which would cover fighters who fought for the promotion from 2017 onward who were impacted by the promotion's anti-competitive business practices. Many were quick to question what the latest news means for the UFC going forward, with one fan asking, "Okay, but what do you think will come out of this if Kung Lee and whoever else he represents wins this case in totality? What does this mean for the current and future fighters?" Another fan responded explaining, as we've previously mentioned, that the payout for fighters who were impacted is expected to be worth millions. It basically proves the UFC has a monopoly on the sport, so it should push through lots of changes, but I'm sure they're suing for millions due to all the issues. Another fan responded writing, "If Zuffa/Endeavor were smart, they'd settle before Discovery starts. Nothing good comes from having all your internal communication be out there for the world to see. Also, they have a really strong case. When it comes to the long-term implications, there seems to be one recurring point. The Ali Act is likely to get expanded to MMA. As one member of the MMA community wrote, the Ali Act is about to get extended to MMA. The UFC's greed did them in." With the ball already rolling on Johnson versus Zuffa and Lee versus Zuffa likely headed to trial, the UFC is in for a long battle ahead. Next up, let's take a look at Ariel Helwani and Chael Sonnen go back and forth. Ariel Helwani and Chael Sonnen are on opposite ends of the spectrum when it comes to how they viewed Francis Ngannou's clash with Tyson Fury in Saudi Arabia. As Sonnen explained after the bout, there was no moral victory to be had by losing to the Gypsy King. The way the American gangster sees things, the Predator still fumbled the bag by pursuing a fight with Tyson Fury instead of re-signing with the UFC. During a recent episode of the MMA Hour, the two got into a heated spat, with Sonnen indicating that Helwani's beef with Dana White creates bias. As he explained, he also believes Helwani was misleading listeners into thinking that others can follow in Ngannou's footsteps.
We should have made it about competition instead of you trying to damage the bigger guys that you think somewhere around the way wronged you. And you know what, partner?
No.
They probably did. But for you to mislead your audience that was a good business move to let somebody else lose money, but it's what I got. Fair enough, partner.
Now I get
Play the lottery for your retirement
I get
plan.
it.
Words
I get it.
by Ariel Helwani.
I get what you're doing.
Helwani then fired back, pointing out how earlier in the episode he stated that other fighters hoping to bet on themselves like Ngannou did likely won't be able to find the same level of success that the Predator did. In the scathing response, Helwani called out Sonnen for suggesting that it all comes down to his beef with Dana White, while shedding light on some beef Sonnen and Ngannou have that adds bias to his side.
Do me a favor, Chael. Don't fucking be a don't be a fucking and dance around this. Say it to my face. Say it to my face like a man, because that's how I know you. Say it to my face and say, "No, Ariel, you have a vendetta. You have a bias against the UFC, and that's why you're doing this." Say it to my face. Grow a fucking pair. And I'll say to you, you have a bias and a vendetta against Francis, and you're a company man, and you work for ESPN, and you don't want to upset Big Bad Dana because he's done some really nice things to you over the years.
The two men continued to go back and forth, with Sonnen finally calling Helwani a weasel before disconnecting the call. Next up, let's take a look at UFC updates. With the end of the year in sight, the UFC has put the pedal to the metal and added a number of fights to upcoming cards. Without further ado, let's jump in, starting with some changes to Saturday's UFC Sao Paulo card. This weekend's card will now see Elvis Brenner compete against Kainan Kruszewski after Esteban Ribovics was forced out of the bout. As a result of the short notice change, the fight will now be contested at 165 pounds. Later this month, Lucas Alexander will face Jaka Saragi on short notice at UFC Vegas 82 after Jesse Butler was forced out of the fight. The card will be headlined by a middleweight tilt between Paul Craig and Brendan Allen and will take place at the UFC Apex on November 18th. With just over a month to go, 4 new fights have also been added to the UFC Shanghai card on December 9th, with Rongju set to fight Shin Haraguchi at lightweight, while Li Kai-wen is set to fight Yi Jia at featherweight. Xiao Long is set to fight Chang Ho Lee at bantamweight, and Rei Tsuruya is set to fight Jin Shuye at flyweight. With plenty of exciting fights added to the card, it's only a matter of time before a main event is finalized. In addition, Paul Felder has officially re-entered the USADA testing pool this week, with the Irish Dragon deciding to re-enroll just in case he caught the urge to fight. Of course, fans have continued to hold out hope that his re-enrollment leads to a big return. Now, let's shift gears and take a look at Henry Cejudo sends warning to the UFC. While the upcoming interim heavyweight title fight between Sergey Pavlovich and Tom Aspinall at UFC 295 has fans thrilled for the future of the heavyweight division, Henry Cejudo believes that the decision to create an interim title here sets a dangerous precedent. In a recent video for his YouTube channel, Cejudo questioned the UFC's decision-making, suggesting that attaching an interim title to a bout that should be a #1 contender fight is diluting what it means to be a champion.
These are two guys that are up and coming, that are in their prime, that could potentially challenge a guy like Jones or Stipe, the winner of that. You know, it is exciting, but is it worth an interim heavyweight championship of the world? No, it isn't. I think the UFC. I think we're starting to dilute a little bit of what it is to actually be a UFC champion.
Of course, many fans have not been pleased with the UFC's decision to commit to a Jones versus Miocic fight once the champ is healthy, questioning why Jones isn't unifying the heavyweight title. With many expecting Jones to retire after his fight with Miocic, however, the winner of the Pavlovich-Aspinall fight could be promoted to undisputed heavyweight champion after the Jones versus Miocic bout takes place. Next, let's take a look at Nate Diaz breaks silence on PFL offer. After Nate Diaz's loss to Jake Paul, many fans expected him to re-sign with the UFC. However, Diaz has recently called Paul out for a rematch inside the ring. Paul, of course, has instead looked to call Diaz out for an MMA bout, something that Diaz has reportedly shown no interest in. During a recent episode of the MMA Hour, PFL founder Don Davis alleged that Diaz was hiding behind a rock after being offered $10 to $15 million to fight Jake Paul in the PFL. In response, Diaz took to social media, making it clear that he's ready to fight Paul on a moment's notice by writing, "This fucker talking he wants to fight, I'm ready to fight tonight. This bitch ain't ready till 2025. So far, it's remained unclear what exactly Diaz has planned for this next bout. If he doesn't wind up securing a rematch with Jake Paul inside the ring, many fans believe that he'll re-sign with the UFC in anticipation of a trilogy fight with Conor McGregor. McGregor, of course, is expected to take on Michael Chandler when he returns to the octagon, with UFC 300 likely playing host to that fight. Next, let's take a look at Daniel Cormier on Kamaru Usman's next fight. After losing 3 straight, Kamaru Usman is eager to return to the win column. Following his UFC 294 loss to Khamzat Chimaev, Usman called out Dricus du Plessis for a clash at UFC 300. The way Hall of Famer Daniel Cormier sees things, however, there's a very intriguing bout to be made between Usman and former middleweight champion Robert Whittaker, who recently suggested that a fight between he and Usman was the fight to make. During a recent episode of DC and RC, the former 2-division champ shared his thoughts on the matchup.
I tap in. I tap all the way into this fight. I think it's a big fight, and I think both of these guys deserve to walk to the octagon in massive fights every single time. So if they're not fighting for the championship, they should be fighting championship level fights. So I'm all in on Kamaru Usman versus Robert Whittaker.
Whittaker, of course, is fresh off a loss to Dricus du Plessis over the summer, which marked his first loss in a non-title fight at middleweight. In the wake of the loss, Whittaker made it clear that he has his sights set on bouncing back and returning to title contention. Next, let's take a look at Derrick Lewis reacts to arrest. This week, shocking news emerged that longtime UFC heavyweight Derrick Lewis was arrested for driving a Lamborghini at a reported 136 miles per hour just days before his main event clash with Jailton Almeida at UFC Fight Night Sao Paulo. After being arrested, Lewis was released on a $100 personal recognizance bond before then heading to Brazil for his fight on Saturday. There, he spoke to media members about the upcoming fight, while also fielding questions about his recent arrest. In true Derrick Lewis fashion, he issued a hilarious response, pointing out that the arrest report said the suspect had black hair.
Nah, I don't even think that was me. Nah, that guy had hair. You seen the picture? I don't got no hair. That ain't me. I don't know.
According to ESPN's Mark Raimondi, Lewis is due back in court on December 27th on reckless driving charges. If convicted, he could face up to 30 days in jail as well as a $200 fine. However, from the sounds of things, it's much more likely that Lewis ends up attending a driver safety course based on other cases of this nature. Saturday's bout will see Lewis look to make it 2 straight after a UFC 291 win over Marcos Rogerio de Lima, while Almeida will look to keep his UFC winning streak alive and move one step closer to title contention. The MMA community went off on Dana White after UFC's first half of 2023 earnings were reported. UFC made over $610 million in the first 2 quarters of the year. Here's what fans had to say. Whole roster combined probably only sees about 4% of their yearly revenue. I really hope that Vince pushes Dana out of his own company. That would be glorious. Just think someone in the UFC office is making more than the fighters they promote. Crazy. Mixed martial arts will only move forward in fighter pay and treatment when the UFC is broken. Hope the lawsuit destroys them so PFL and ONE can rise to a higher market share. Let this sink in too. Dana worth $500 million, and now this comes out, but fighters are still struggling to live in the rankings. If that don't show how much these fools don't care about these fighters, I don't know what will. Literally zero excuse y'all can give me. $500 to $600 million dollars. Meanwhile, fighters are working part-time jobs while being a top 15 fighter. Top comments, Sean O'Malley. I agree with the judges, while the judges don't even agree with each other. Francis earned more in his boxing match than his whole UFC career. There's talks of him going up against Wilder. His star power is growing at a fast rate. I honestly see him earning much more in the upcoming fights. If he knocks out Wilder, that's another story entirely. He deserves every dime though. Best decision he's ever made in his life was leaving the UFC. Remember when Dana said Francis fought 3 times in the last 3 years? He needs a reminder that Jones fought once in the last 3 years and is probably out for another. Like, WTF is this? Why was Jones not stripped for his belt and asked to fight for it when he returns? What a load of bias and crap. 8-month minimum wait for Jones to come back and not fight the interim champ is just weird. We're just wasting prime years now in the heavyweight division because it just doesn't move because it gets tied up for years at a time. Ian Gary, your favorite fighter's least favorite fighter. Make sure to leave a comment and you might get featured in our next video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss any MMA news. Check out our video from yesterday if you missed it. See you tomorrow.